The night I walked into that ballroom, I already knew how it was going to end. I'd worn the navy dress my mother bought me years ago, the one she said made me look put together. I remember standing in the hotel lobby, smoothing the fabric with both palms, breathing through my nose the way my therapist taught me. Slow in, slow out. You've done harder things than this, she always said. I never fully believed her until that night. My brother had called me 2 weeks earlier. He said our father wanted the whole family there. A fundraising dinner, black tie, $400 a plate, the kind of event where people write checks just to be seen writing checks. I almost said no. I'd said no to so many things over the past 8 years that the word had started to feel like muscle memory. But this time felt different. This time, I had something worth showing up for. Let me back up. I grew up watching my father run a room. He has this way of entering a space. Shoulders back, chin up, voice already at full volume before the doors even open. That makes people turn. He was a hospital administrator for most of my childhood, not a doctor, not a surgeon. But he'd learned, somewhere along the way, that if you acted like the most important person in the room, people tended to believe you. He applied that same logic to parenting. My brother became a financial advisor, close enough to medicine in my father's mind because it involved money and men in suits. My sister married a cardiologist. That bought her a permanent seat at the Thanksgiving table and a lot of grace when she didn't call on Sundays. And then there was me. I was 23 when I took the job at Bridges. It was a residential treatment center for adults recovering from addiction, mostly opioids, some alcohol, a few people fighting both at once. My title was case manager, which in practice meant I was the person they called at 2 a.m. when someone was in crisis. I tracked discharge plans. I connected people to housing. I sat across from men who had lost their kids, women who hadn't slept in 3 days, teenagers who had already used more times than most people do in a lifetime. And I tried to make them believe that the next part of their life could be different. I loved it. I loved it the way I imagined surgeons love surgery, the weight of it, the realness of it, the feeling that something mattered. My father called it social work stuff. The first time he said it, I thought he was just being dismissive in that vague way he could be about anything that didn't involve a title he recognized. The second time, I corrected him. I explained the difference between a social worker and a case manager. The licensure I was working toward, the outcomes data are center-tracked. He looked at me the way he looked at restaurant menus he'd already decided not to order from. Patient. Checked out. Well, he said, at least you're doing something. I stopped correcting him after that. The years that followed were a study in smallness, not in my own life, and how much space he allowed me to take up in his. I missed the seating arrangement at my cousin's rehearsal dinner because he told the event coordinator I was coming alone and doesn't need to be near the head table. I found out later he'd told my aunt I worked somewhere downtown, some kind of clinic thing. At his retirement party, the one his hospital threw, the one with catering and a slideshow, he introduced his children to the board chair, my brother by name and title, my sister by her husband's specialty, me as my youngest. She does community work. Community work. I smiled. I shook the board chair's hand. I excused myself to get a drink and stood by the window for a long time looking out at the parking lot, breathing through my nose. I never said anything. I know that's the part people question. Why didn't you just tell him to stop? Why didn't you walk out? Why did you keep showing up? Because I kept thinking it would change. Because he was my father. Because somewhere under all of it, there was the version of him I remembered from when I was 8 years old. The one who used to quiz me on state capitals in the car, who called me his sharp one, who once drove 40 minutes in the rain because I forgot my costume for a school play. I kept waiting for that person to come back. He didn't. 3 years ago, I was promoted to Director of Community Programs at Bridges. My responsibilities expanded. I now oversaw 2 satellite locations, managed a team of 11, and critically, I became the point of contact for our state funding relationships. That last part is important. Bridges received grant money from the State Department of Health and Human Services. The grants were administered through a review committee. 18 months after my promotion, I was appointed to that committee as an external reviewer. I evaluated applications from organizations across our region, nonprofits, community health centers, treatment facilities, and made funding recommendations. I told my father about the promotion. He said, "That's nice, sweetheart. More responsibility usually means they're trying to avoid giving you a raise." I did not tell him about the committee. About 6 months before that fundraising dinner, an application crossed my desk. The organization was called the Hargrove Community Wellness Initiative. It was a nonprofit based about 40 miles outside the city. On paper, it looked solid. The executive director had credentials. The mission statement was well written. The budget projections were clean. But something nagged at me. I pulled the public filings. I cross-referenced the board of directors. I requested supplemental documentation, which is standard procedure and which most organizations provide without issue. Hargrove's director pushed back. Wanted to know why we needed additional materials. Sent a letter through a lawyer rather than responding directly. That alone told me something. I dug deeper. What I found wasn't illegal exactly, but it was the kind of thing that becomes illegal once the wrong person puts it together with the right records. The organization's reported program expenses didn't match their activity. Significant funds had been moved between accounts in ways that benefited a related LLC. The executive director was listed as a consultant to that LLC. I flagged it. I wrote up my findings and submitted them to the committee chair and to the State Inspector General's office, which handles grant fraud investigations. The review process takes time. These things always do. But by the time my brother called to tell me about the fundraiser, I had a very clear sense of where things were heading. I Googled the event. The Hargrove Community Wellness Initiative was listed as one of the evening's presenting partners. I sat with that for a while. Then I looked up the gala's guest list, publicly posted on the organization's website because they were proud of who was coming. I read the names of the board members, the donors, the featured speakers. My father's name was there. Not as a guest. As the evening's honorary chair. I read it twice. Then I called my brother back and said yes. I want to be honest about what I felt in the 2 weeks before that dinner. I'd like to say it was pure and righteous and clean. It wasn't entirely. Some of it was. I genuinely believed the investigation needed to play out the way it played out in a documented, official process with oversight and evidence. That part of me wasn't performing. I'd worked in enough systems to know that private confrontations accomplish almost nothing, and that the only language institutions understand is the one made in writing with witnesses. But the other part of me, the part that had smiled at that board chair, that had stood by windows at parties, that had absorbed 8 years of community work stuff without once saying what I actually wanted to say, that part was ready. I drove to the hotel alone. I wore the navy dress. I got there early enough to find my seat and orient myself the way I used to do before difficult intake meetings at Bridges. The room was full by the time my father arrived. He came in the way he always does, shoulders back, chin up, already talking before he'd fully crossed the threshold. He had on his best suit. He was smiling at people I didn't recognize. He saw me, registered mild surprise, and came over. "You came," he said. "You invited me," I said. He smiled, the tight kind, and excused himself to greet someone more important. I found my seat. I ate the salad. I drank water. I listened to the opening remarks and the welcome from the organization's board chair and a video about all the good work the Hargrove Initiative was doing in the community. I kept my face very still. Then my father was introduced as the honorary chair. He walked to the podium. He thanked the room. He talked about community investment and legacy and the importance of supporting organizations that do the hard work the rest of us overlook. He said, and I want to make sure I have this exactly right because I've replayed it many times. He said, "I've spent my career in healthcare. I know what it means to be in the room where real decisions get made. Not everyone is cut out for that. Not everyone has the stomach for it, but the people in this room, you're the ones who show up." He looked out at the audience. He was beaming. He did not look at me. He wrapped up his remarks and opened the floor for a short Q&A before dinner resumed. The moderator asked if anyone from the audience had a question. I raised my hand. I have thought about this moment so many times in the months since that I'm not sure anymore what I planned to say versus what I actually said. I know I stood up. I know the moderator pointed to me and I walked to the floor mic at the end of the center aisle. I could feel the room in that specific way. You can feel rooms when you've spent years learning how to read them, the slight lean forward, the attention narrowing. My father hadn't recognized me from the stage. Too many people, too much light. He was looking at the moderator. I said, "Thank you. I actually have a question about the Hargrove Initiative's funding structure." My voice was steady. I'd been practicing that steadiness for a long time. The board chair at the table shifted. I said, specifically, I'd like to understand how the organization reconciles the discrepancy between its reported program expenditures and the consultant payments made to Westfield Advisory Group over the past 2 fiscal years. Silence. Not the kind that means no one heard. The kind that means everyone did. My father found me in the room. I watched his face go through several things in a short amount of time. The board chair said something about complex accounting and not having specifics available at this kind of event. I said, I understand. I'm actually familiar with the specifics. I reviewed this application in my capacity as an external grant reviewer for the State Department of Health and Human Services. I submitted a detailed report to the Inspector General's office 11 weeks ago. I imagine some of the people in this room will be hearing from that office soon, if they haven't already. Someone at the back of the room said something I couldn't make out. A few people near the front were already reaching for their phones. My father stood up from his chair. He said my name. The way he said it was different from any way he'd ever said it before. No impatience in it, no performance. Just my name, a little raw. I looked at him. I said, I'm sorry to disrupt your evening. I think this was important enough to say in a room full of witnesses. I thanked the moderator. I walked back to my seat. I picked up my jacket from the chair. A woman at my table touched my arm and said, very quietly, good for you. I don't know her name. I never got it. But I think about her sometimes. My father found me near the coatroom. About 15 minutes her sometimes. My father found me near the coatroom. About 15 minutes later. The dinner had technically resumed, but the energy in the room had curdled. People eating quickly, talking in lowered voices. The kind of event that used to feel like a triumph and now felt like something to get through. He was not at full volume. You came here to do this, he said. I came because you invited me, I said again. I wasn't being clever. It was just true. You have no idea what you've just done. To me, to this evening. I looked at him for a moment. I want to be careful how I describe what I felt, because I've seen enough people in crisis to know that the moment of confrontation rarely feels the way you imagine it will. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel righteous. I felt tired, mostly. And a little sad. And underneath all of it, more settled in myself than I'd been in years. I said, I've spent 8 years in rooms where I wasn't real to you, where I was community work stuff, where I got the corner seat and the vague introduction and the sense that whatever I was doing, it didn't quite count. I kept my voice quiet. What I did tonight counted. I used what I'm actually good at to flag something that would have cost the state over $400,000 in misused grant funds, money that was supposed to go to people who need it. That's what my job is. That's what it's been the whole time. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, I didn't know you were on that committee. No, I said. You never asked. I pulled on my jacket. He said, we need to talk about this. Not here. This doesn't have to become what you're making it. I thought about all the times I'd agreed to versions of that sentence. The times I'd smoothed things over and shown back up and decided to believe that next time would be different. I said, the Inspector General's office has my report. The committee has my recommendation. The process is going to run its course whether we talk or not. There's nothing I'm making happen here. I just did my job. I picked up my bag. He said my name again. I stopped. I turned back. I don't know why exactly. Maybe the same reason I kept showing up for years. Maybe because he looked, in that moment, less like the man who'd introduced me as community work stuff, and more like someone who had just understood something too late. I said, Dad, I've wanted you to see me for a long time. I'm sorry it took this. Then I walked out through the lobby and into the night air, which smelled like rain. The investigation concluded 7 months later. I won't detail everything because some of it is still part of ongoing proceedings, but the short version is this. The Hargrove Initiative lost its state funding. The executive director resigned. Several financial practices were referred to the county district attorney's office. My report was cited in the official findings. I got a letter from the Inspector General's office thanking the committee for its thorough review. I printed it out and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't frame it. It wasn't that kind of thing. My father and I have not spoken at length since that night. He called once, a few weeks after. He said he was sorry things happened the way they happened. I'm still thinking about what that sentence means. Sorry they happened, or sorry for the way he'd been handling things for years. I don't know. I didn't ask. Maybe someday I will. My brother texted me the night of the dinner and said, "I heard what happened. Didn't know you were on that committee." I replied, "I know." He sent a thumbs up. "We're working on it." What I keep coming back to, the thing I turn over on my drive home sometimes when the radio's off and I'm thinking, is that I used to believe the only way to be seen by someone who refused to look at you was to become something they couldn't ignore, to get a bigger title, to make more money, to show up somewhere that mattered on their terms. But what happened in that ballroom wasn't about making him look at me. It was about something I'd actually done. 8 years of building something real, learning a system, earning a seat on a committee nobody was watching, doing a job so thoroughly that when it mattered, I had receipts. He didn't call me community work stuff because I wasn't doing real work. He called me that because the work I was doing didn't fit the shape of what he recognized as real. That's a him problem. It took me a long time to understand that distinction. I still have the navy dress. My mother was right about it. It does make me look put together. I just finally had something underneath it worth showing up for. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night, not in any grand spiritual sense, just the plain practical kind. The kind where you trace a line from one decision to the next and realize that what looks like a sudden moment was actually years in the making. That ballroom didn't happen because I planned some elaborate revenge. It happened because I kept doing my job, even when nobody who mattered to me was watching. That's the part I want to sit with for a second. My father spent years operating under the assumption that if he didn't see the value in something, the value wasn't there. He's not unique in that. A lot of people move through the world that way, measuring what counts by what's visible to them, what carries a title they recognize, what fits neatly into the story they've built about success. And because I loved him, I kept trying to make myself legible to that story. I kept showing up. I kept explaining. I kept waiting for the introduction that would finally feel like being seen. What I didn't understand for a long time is that the waiting was costing me something. Not just confidence, though it was that too. It was costing me the belief that my own read on my own life was trustworthy. Every time I smoothed something over, every time I smiled at a party and excused myself to stand by a window, I was quietly teaching myself that his version of reality was more valid than mine. It took a long time to unlearn that. What finally did it wasn't a confrontation. It was competence. It was showing up to unglamorous work for 8 years and getting good enough at it that the work started speaking for itself, in rooms where I wasn't even present to explain it. The state committee didn't appoint me because of my family name or because someone put in a good word. They appointed me because I built something worth appointing. There's something I keep coming back to, and I think it's this. Integrity is what you do when the outcome is uncertain. When I flagged that application, I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know it would lead anywhere near that gala. I just knew the numbers didn't add up, and that the people who were supposed to receive that funding weren't receiving it, and that doing nothing would have made me complicit in something I'd spent my career fighting against. So I wrote the report. I submitted it through the proper channels. I kept doing the job. What I've learned, slowly and not without cost, is that the people who dismiss you are often doing you an accidental favor. They leave you alone. They stop watching. And in that unwatched space, if you're paying attention and you keep working, you build something real, something that doesn't need their approval to exist. My father said that night near the coatroom that he didn't know I was on that committee. And I told him the truth. He never asked. That's not bitterness. That's just a fact. The things worth knowing about a person rarely announce themselves. You have to ask. You have to look. You have to decide that someone's inner life is worth your curiosity. I'm still deciding whether to have that longer conversation with him. Some days I think I will. Some days I think what I said at the coatroom door was enough, not to close anything, but to say it plainly, finally, in a way that couldn't be smoothed over or reinterpreted. I still have the navy dress hanging in my closet. I'm not waiting for permission to wear it again.